Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here.
We're talking to the president of the Canadian Cattle Association, is Nathan Phinney. Nathan, how's it going?
Great, Sean. How are you?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. Okay, so lots happening from a private members bill standpoint. There was a time where private members bills, like who cares? Don't pay attention to them. But boy, they are in this minority government. They are getting some traction. And you need to pay attention because what you think may not be an issue could be one, depending on how it works its way through the House and the Senate. The one that I know you at CC have been paying a lot of attention to is 282. It seemed kind of like it was sort of dead or not, maybe forgotten, not going to move any further in the Senate. And now all of a sudden the Bloc has the power after the NDP left their agreement with the Liberals. And one of the conditions the Bloc has put on the Liberals is get 282 passed. This is some concern for, I imagine, the cattle sector.
Well, not just the cattle sector, but overall trade policy. And it doesn't even matter if you're in agriculture or if you're in automotive or aluminum or softwood lumber, or I can go on and on. 90% of agriculture is free trading open market. 10% is supply management. So that in itself is kind of questioning us why this ludicrous bill is still being out there, potentially harming 90% of agriculture that rely on free traders. But then if you look at the economy as a whole, in the business world that drives, our economy, that's less than 1% supply managed. So why are we going to dabble around and play around with a bill that potentially could set precedents and be as dangerous as this? And you're right. When the coalition between NDP and Liberals broke, the Bloc came up and said that they wanted this passed through. And again, is Canada or the federal government willing to adhere to less than 1% of the economic business world in Canada to appease a party that basically, Blanchette cares about Quebec and not the rest of Canada? So I really think it's time for everybody outside of agriculture, whether it be the business council or the Chamber of Commerce, who also has a very small amount of members that sit on there that are supply management, and start listening to everybody else that isn't supply management and stand up for what's right.
What's interesting about 282 to me is a lot of people want to make it, and this is how it was in the House. The vote happened, and it was sort of like who supports supply management and who doesn't. And I think that's making it way too simple. I actually, whether you're for or against 282, and I've said this in my speeches, I don't think, if you're against 282, it doesn't mean you're against supply management. It's the premise of the bill is to basically say it's market access going forward for supply managed products is off the books. It cannot be given up anymore in trade deals. And that's different than being pro or against supply management. And I talked to some dairy farmers, for example, in my speeches through last winter, and they're like, you know what, obviously I believe in supply management. I think this is a bad idea. So not all dairy farmers, let's not group them together. They're not all in favor of 282, like some may suspect.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we're opposed to supply management. It's a system that's been in place for a number of decades, and it works for their system. But why completely undermine and erode all the free traders that are out there? And if it's been your standing policy forever to protect it, then protect it. Doug Forsyth was at committee hearing, one of the chief negotiators, and said that this would be precedent setting for Canada, who totes themselves as being a world trader and known as a trading country, that will be the first country to go in with something like this. Last night we were looking at Camilla Harris tweets coming out, and she was talking specifically about Kuzma and her intent. I mean, a lot of it was around autos, but her clear intent was to use that platform in 2026 to kind of renegotiate, not just a review, but to tear that up and dive into it. And we heard very clearly, amount of times we're in the States, that if something like this had been in place back when the Kuzma or NAFTA negotiations were happening, the deals would have not happened. And then therefore you're hurting the whole Canadian economy and not just one small sector. So again, I really am disappointed that it's gotten to this point. Blanchette has passed a motion in the House to try to expedite the Senate to get this through. Thank God for the Senate right now to study this bill and see the negative effects that this will
Yeah.
have on Canada as a whole.
Yeah, and listen, I understand the irony. There's probably some listeners saying, "Oh, wait a minute." So we wanted the Senate to move fast on 234, the carbon tax bill, but we want the Senate to act slow on 282. Yeah, I understand it. It depends on your perspective on both of those bills and what you want the Senate to do. 355. What is C 355?
It's a horse ban, exporting horses by air, live horses for export. And again, it goes along with a bill C-293, which is a bill that's been put forth by Nate Erskine Smith on eating more plant-based. Both of these bills are not science or rules-based bills. They're bills based on emotion. And, for a trading country like Canada that relies heavily on exports to keep our economy strong, we cannot continue to allow these private member bills that are based on nothing short of personal preference or emotion to make their way to where they are. We are science and rules based. Our agriculture minister, federal minister Macaulay, has said that. We've heard that from the federal government of today. They support science and rules based. Those are the principles that we need to adhere to and make sure that we're continuing to follow. And I think it's kind of naive to think that, back to 282, if you look at downtown Toronto, where a vast majority of the seats are sitting and a lot of the business happens in the business communities down there, or some of these bigger cities, if you think passing a bill like this is going to help you on either side of party that supports this going forward, I think you got to really look in the mirror and reflect of how mistaken you are. This 282 could be crippling to our economy with our biggest trading partner.
Yeah, I want to clarify. C 355 is not only the prohibiting the export of, but it's horses for the purpose of slaughter is what the export ban is tied to. This to me is an example, though, like although that may, I'm curious as to the why of that. And I always think sort of thin edge of the wedge, and I don't want to be hyperbolic about it, but if we're willing to ban the export of horses for slaughter, then what is next? And although Canadians, it's not a tradition and a custom to slaughter horses for food consumption, other cultures that we do a lot of trading with, France, Austria, I believe Switzerland is another one that horse meat is common. For sure, France. This isn't like we're not shipping it to the moon and aliens are consuming the horses. I have personally, although I'm not having horse steaks this Sunday, I don't know why we're so particular on this issue.
One of the biggest countries and one of our friendliest trading partners is Japan.
Right.
And
Yes.
they've
Thank you.
really been loud here out of their embassy on this bill. And more or less, you're exactly right. It's not a product that is consumed heavily here in Canada, but in other countries they are. And horses are deemed as livestock. And two things: we're worried about the precedent setting by first it's horses, and then what's next that you can't transport for slaughter. Um, and then, as a country that's talking about food security and being a country that can help solve world hunger and supply product to the rest of the globe and here domestically, now we're going to dictate to these countries of what proteins are suitable for them to consume and not
Yeah.
consume. I think this is very, very dangerous setting.
Well, hey,
Um,
Nathan, I'll give you an example. Let's just use the cow, for example. Okay, so in Canada, we love our tenderloin, the rib steak, the T-bone, like we've got our cuts that we prefer. but the total value of the carcass is important. And there are lots of cuts and there's lots of components of that cow that we ship all over the world that likely if you had it at your local Loblaws, no one's buying it. And I don't really see that much of a difference in this case. And I know that probably some of our audience is going to, provide some feedback, and that's fine. Maybe you disagree and you're entitled to that, but I just don't see much of a difference.
No, and it's a backwards model to production that what most people are accustomed to. You buy the pieces as low as cost you can, you assemble the final product, and you sell it for a cost. When we're dealing with livestock, we have a finished product that we have to break down into portions to be saleable, to be able to move them. And you're exactly right. Every country, every demographic has certain portions that they desire, that they want to consume. We're cutting out roughly 300 different products out of a single animal, and international trade and good trade policy is bringing back $1,300 to $1,400 per head. That is what is keeping us on a competitive edge. And the minute that you start dictating, well, you can't export that because certain private members bills such as 355 come along, we're going down a very dangerous slope with this. So this is another bill that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, not a surprise. This is in the mandate letter of the Minister of Agriculture as well. So this one's been on the radar for quite some time. Hey, Nathan, really appreciate you joining us here today on Real Ag Radio. All the best to you.
No problem, Sean. Thanks. Anytime.
That is Nathan Phinney. He is president of the Canadian Cattle Association, talking to us from his ranch in New Brunswick.